So let's talk about the Red Lion. Hopefully, I guess everyone here is familiar with the Red Lion pub on Church Street. So we're going to talk about the old Red Lion. Ooh, yeah, there was an old one. And the new one. And this talk will also answer that ancient old question, why do pubs have 4 to 5 doors, but only one of them is actually in use? And then you get that kind of annoying moment when you're trying to meet someone and you try to open the door and it doesn't open, and it's a bit embarrassing, but now you're going to find out why. Because back in the day, each one of those doors led to a compartment that had a specific purpose. It was part of the social hierarchy of the time. So you had the saloon bar, the private bar, the off-license, the public bar, and based on your social class and gender, you would go either to this one or to that one. So we're going to see how that really impacted the design of pubs, and there are some traces today. So let's start with talking about the old Red Lion. So this is an early map of Stoke Newington from 1741, where you can see that all it was just Church Street. That was it. So you've got Church Street, this is the High Street, this is Green Lanes. Okay, so Newington Common later became Cleethorpes Park. So there wasn't much, just a few houses and 20 estate agents. All right? And if you think about where the Red Lion, so just here, right, you can see Lordship Lane, which became Lordship Road, and the Red Lion is just here. It was always here for a very long time. It was actually first recorded in 1697. So it is actually older than that. Looking at another map, 1846. So you can see here now you've got this fork, little kind of island. So you have the Red Lion. Behind it was the watch house, which was the original police station. There were the kind of the cages, which is the lockup. So if you misbehaved, if you were drunk, if you used profanity, or if you said the Lord's name in vain, you would end up in the lockup just behind the Red Lion. And today you can still see there's just the door and the 2 narrow windows with the bars if you go just behind the Red Lion. So that's the only remnant of the lockup. This is a drawing of the old Red Lion from 1869. It was actually 2 different houses. Okay, originally it was 2 different houses that got merged. Originally the number was 40 and 41. They were renumbered 114, 116. And in 1937 the pub was renamed and renumbered 132. And the reason why in a very small village, in a very small parish like Stoke Newington, a pub was actually a house, or it started as a house, and we're going to see that there's a reason why pubs are called public house, because if you had the license, you could just invite people to come into your kitchen, put their dog to kind of some good use, okay, and just have a pint. All right, and this was the idea, that people just entertained and provided beer in their kitchen. But if the gentry came, you don't take them to the kitchen with all the riffraff and all the laborers, you take them to the parlor, right, where they can watch Netflix and there's a nice carpet, there's all the kind of the ferns and all the good furniture. You take the middle class and kind of the nobles even to the good rooms, and everyone else goes into the very basic, very simple room. And that's why most pubs started just as a house. Just to go through some of the census information to give us a sense of who lived and worked in the Red Lion all those years ago. So this is 1861. So you can see you had the family of the publican, and then either people that were lodging, because we're going to see that there were a few rooms at the time. But a lot of times you're going to see that the publican changed quite regularly. So this is 1871 when it was John Ayres. He was 27. He was there with his wife and 2 sons. There was a servant and a nursemaid. This is really cool. This is actually a token. So pubs used to have tokens. So you could actually buy them like you do in a fairground. So rather than walk around with money in the age where you could just get mugged for having money, you just buy that and you pay for your drinks, for your meal, using these tokens. This is 1881, so you can see almost every 10 years, at least from the census, there's a new family moving in, a new publican, usually with the family. It was a family business. This is 1890, lovely photo. And you can see the old numbers, so 114. This house, number 130, still stands. All these were demolished in the 30s. But you're going to see in a lot of these old photos that the publican was a big figure in the community. Right? To get a license, you had to be of good standing and good character. You could sign legal documents. It was a big, big deal. So they would often have their names on the sign. So you can see John Gale. And someone pointed out to me that it was always the man, even if the woman was the one running the whole place. It was never the woman's name, always the man's name. Looking at the reverse angle, you can geek out about the lovely old pre-1917 and postcode street sign as well. So many details, right? And by the way, you're going to see that this sign here says saloon bar. This was the entrance to the saloon bar. We're going to see more about that. Now, when I post this photo, people ask me, who is this guy? You know, he looks kind of with a bit of a strange expression on his face, and he's holding this cart. What's going on there? You see this guy there? It's a bit almost out of the frame. In case you're wondering, this is James Sargent, a milkman from Kersley Road. We managed to kind of track him down. So maybe just finished his round, popped into the Red Lion for a drink, as you do. This is the 1891 census. You can see relatively small families, but then you've got the staff and potential lodgers as well living there. And then there's a new owner, and this is where they announced that the Red Lion is now under new ownership, pretty much like you get today, right? Like new ownership and free drinks on Friday and so on. Cigars of the finest brands, as you'd expect. This is now circa 1902, and the reason we know that because you can see the name of Robert Hoist, the publican, just there as well. So every time they came, they got rid of the old publican's name, put their name on the building, so you know who's the publican. This is 1910. You can see the Truman sign. So for a very long time, most pubs were tied to a brewery. So if you like to think about it, they were kind of like the shop of the brewery. You could only sell Truman beer or Courage beer or Watney's and so on. If you weren't a tied house, you were a free house. Not many of those. Which is why if you see on some pubs it says free house, it might be an old sign because they weren't tied to a brewery. They could sell a bit of Truman, a bit of Courage, a bit of wheat bread, anything they wanted. Now, let's start looking at the plan of the pub, and this is where it gets interesting. So we looked at all the photos of the old Red Lion. It was 2 houses and so on. These are the drawings that were actually made by the architect who designed the new pub, so almost as a survey. And it's really, really fascinating when you start to realize just how this pub was from the inside. Very, very different from what you'd expect today. We're going to see, first of all, it had 12 bedrooms. 12. So there was the main pub building, but just behind it, where the beer garden is today, there were 2 rooms. We're going to see almost like private meeting rooms, the parlor. There were 2 parlor rooms, and above them, there were bedrooms. And you also had the 2nd floor and the 1st floor as well. All right, so they could basically have lodgers around, another way to, I guess, sort of make ends meet. But what I really want to look at is the interior of the pub itself. And this is really fascinating. It's something that I've been researching for a long time. I'm giving a talk on the 7th in the bookshop just on this one topic. Today, pubs are open plan. You can think of them as a 1-room pub or as a 1-bar pub. But if you look at this plan, you realize that originally pubs were this very intricate maze of all these very small compartments, sometimes referred to as room. And you can see that each of them had a different name. So you had a public, a private, a saloon, a parlor. And this is exactly the same idea as in your own home. Right? You probably have the best room in the house, the lounge. We've got all the nice kind of furniture and the carpets and all the lovely trinkets and so on. And maybe in the kitchen, you just got a bench. Okay? And this was the same idea. These layouts evolved from someone's house. So if you were a laborer and you were in kind of messy overalls and dirty clothes, you go in the public bar and you just sit on a bench. If you're an office worker, or if you're a manager or a boss or someone in uniform, you go to the saloon, where you're going to have a carpet, a fern, nice padded furniture as well. The drinks are going to be a bit more expensive, but you basically share the same space with the working class, and what's defining that space is the name on the door. And as we're going to see, there was a very thin timber partition that divided the classes. So you can think about this almost as 3rd class, 2nd class, and 1st class. All right, so we're going to see what each of those mean. A nice visual that I used to try to explain. I suppose some of you are familiar with this lovely sketch, but the idea was that the layout of the pub really reflected the strict hierarchy in society at the time. If you were dressed like that, you go to the saloon. If you're dressed like that, you go to the public, you're going to play darts, you're going to play dominoes with your friends, you're going to get quite rowdy. This guy can probably take his wife to the saloon bar. He won't take his wife to the public bar with the guys that just finished a shift in the factory. And all these entrances were marked. They had a lot of different names, a lot of lovely designs. Some pubs still have them and retain the original signage. So for example, the Rose and Crown has private bar, public bar, and outdoor department above the main entrance, which is another name for the off license. But we're going to see there was a lot of variety, but this was just telling you where you need to go. So if you're a worker in overalls and a flat cap, you look for the public bar. If you just finished a shift in the city, finished working in the bank, you go to the saloon. Now, the variety of names is astounding. I still discover new ones almost every month. There's also a bit of a north-south divide in terms of the names. If you don't think that line is in the right place, I don't care. I moved it so many times now. But you get the idea, right? Some names kind of cut across, but in northern pubs, you might find names that you won't find in the south and vice versa. I was quite curious about this segregation and how partitioned really was it. And to my surprise, when you look at actual photos, and there are not that many, and even surviving ones, the idea was to create an intimate environment, but not a claustrophobic one. You didn't want to make people feel like they're in a little tiny room. It was meant to be intimate and cozy, but you can see that this could be the saloon, and the people behind it is the public bar. Okay, here you've got the lovely furniture. There it's all more kind of bare and basic, spit and sawdust, but you can still look across in some cases. You don't feel like you just entered this little cell. So we're going to see that when you look at some surviving partitions, also called screens, this is the holy grail of the partition pub. Yes, there is such a thing. It's great to list it. I highly recommend you go and visit the Prince Alfred in Maida Vale. It has 5 surviving compartments with all the original partitions. And I think the idea is to go there and have a pint in each one of them and just move around. But you can see that they were very ornate, they were very decorative. When you think about a partition today, people think just like a plaster wall, but this was part of the interior, and people, the pot boys, could actually go underneath and collect all the glasses. This was not for you, this was for the staff. We talked about the different rooms in the pubs and how they evolved and disappeared. This is the former saloon lounge in the 3 Crowns at the bottom of Church Street. The saloon lounge was even posher than the saloon bar. You had a waiter. It was basically the top end you can have. And if you think, how would this be like a posh saloon lounge? Because it used to look like this. Quite cozy and intimate. So you can see that pubs just have these different types of rooms. So depending on the clientele, you would go into that entrance. Otherwise, you would go in the other ones. Another local pub, one of my favorites, the Shakespeare. Okay, so this was the former saloon bar in the Shakespeare. And it used to look a bit more modest than the 3 Crowns because it's not a saloon lounge and it's more like a backstreet pub. This was the saloon. And you notice, I don't know if you can see, these panels here. You see these little glass rotating panels. This was called a snob screen. So when you're in the saloon and you order your drink, and God forbid you catch the working class on the other side of the bar, you order the drink and you then close and say bye-bye. There are only 8 of these original surviving in the country. All right, so not even kind of looking at the staff. The public bar, as I said, was a bit more basic, right? These are kind of typical public bars, no frills, just kind of a place to sit and order a drink. Initially, it was mostly men, but that also changed because society was changing. And by the 60s and 70s, a lot of those partitions were being removed. Pubs wanted to actually charge more money, so they wanted to use the saloon pricing across rather than have kind of discounted drinks for the working class in the public bar. So they just ripped all the partitions, which is a real shame. You don't really see many of them around. This is just a lovely quote from the book that I'm going to talk about on November 7th, called Back to the Local. Gives you a feel of all these different compartments and what you could expect. So there are many public bars where any patron who is too obviously not dressed as a laborer is regarded with distrust. His presence is resented by patrons as well as by management on natural grounds that he can afford the saloon bar. So you would get the look. And it's really interesting when you start really geeking out about the interior, because you start to realize that there are differences in the actual interior of those compartments. So this is the Red Lion. You can see that the public bar, kind of the whole paneling along the wall is very basic. In the saloon bar, it's a bit more decorative. There's a bit more attention to details in the same place. Next time you go, just have a look around and you can tell exactly where the public starts and the saloon ends. And in the Rose and Crown, you can also see it in the counter itself. So the public bar used to be here. There used to be a partition, darker paint as well, maybe if it's going to get more dirty from grease or anything else. But the private bar, which was kind of between the public and the saloon, was a bit nicer. So let's talk about the road widening that led to the Red Line being demolished and the new one being built. And let's see if I can get through this in 8 minutes. So by the 1920s and 1930s, there was a significant increase in vehicle traffic. And the problem was that a lot of these old villages and old parishes, their roads were very narrow. They were just like a 1-lane wide road that was used once a month, I guess, by the postman. So by the time you had buses and more traffic, local authorities had to start widening the roads. And in many cases, they would have to either demolish buildings or completely truncate the front gardens of the really old houses. And this is the plan just for that junction. So you've got Church Street and you've got Lordship Road there. This is just a comparison between the old Red Lion, which is the yellow dotted line, and the new one. And it really gives you a sense of how, I guess, small they had to build the new one just to accommodate both Church Street and Lordship Road to make them into 2 lanes. Interesting that 90 years later now local authorities are doing the opposite, widening the pavement. You can see in that plan that they actually went as far as getting to this level of detail. So the nice kind of corners of the future building are actually marked as well as plan. Now, when I thought about road widening, I thought about, okay, but by how much? And I tried to zoom in on the maps and it was quite difficult. So I tried to come up with a very scientific way to compare the width of a road between 2 photos. And the best I could come up with is counting how many people I could fit from one photo into that gap. So bear with me, okay? I'm not sure that it's going to pass a Viva if this was a PhD, but we'll try. So old road, you could fit 8 people going to a fancy dress party. And present day, if you look at that woman there, she has no clue what's happening. 11. Just go with it. Just assume that it's wider, okay? But now you have some scientific proof. So let's talk about the new Red Line, the one that you must sort of maybe pass every day. So the Red Line was designed by a very renowned architect. So Arthur Edward Sewell, he was the chief architect of Truman Brewery. He designed 50 pubs for them in the interwar years. Again, my goal one day is to have a drink in each one of them. Probably should just print almost like a bingo card. We actually had, if you look at it, we have the Rose and Crown. The Army and Navy is not far away, even though technically in Islington. And we also had the Arundel Arms, which was demolished. And we have the Red Lion. So he actually had quite a few of his pubs locally, and you might be familiar with some of the other ones. The Royal Oak in Bethnal Green, you've got the Stag's Head in Hoxton, and it's quite interesting when you look at them because there are a lot of similar features. You can see the DNA in them. I managed to find the original plan in the Hackney archives of the new Red Line, which is amazing. Would love to have this printed and framed at this size if I could fit it somewhere. Now, when you look at the Red Line and you think about pubs, and if you go and you have drinks in the city and the West End, a lot of times pubs are like palaces. They were kind of drinking palaces. And you think, they had all these ornate etched glasses and the brass and the architecture is amazing. You look at the Red Line and it looks like a hut, right? And I used to think that it was a really old village pub. Not so. But we're going to see why. So the pubs from the 19th century, a lot of them were designed in what's called the gin palace style. Very lavish, almost like a little cathedral for drinkers, right? You wanted to really wow people with all this lovely tile work and brass work and glass work, and you went in, it was astounding. It's like going to the theater. Even in some of the public bars, you would still have a lot of kind of fancy features and fittings as well. The problem was that pubs were having a really bad reputation. Both magistrates and social reformers put a lot of pressure on the breweries to basically get their act together and make pubs more respectable, more welcoming to families and women. Can you imagine that? So the result was to tone it down, and rather than going all glitz with all kind of the lavish designs, is to look and kind of be more nostalgic. And what became the improved, reformed pub was really leveraging a lot of kind of Tudor and Georgian features. So in this case, it's a neo-Tudor. So that's why it kind of looks much older than it really is. But the idea, if you think about the features and everything about it, it wasn't about this lavish palace. It was something that was less intimidating and more welcoming. This is from the plan, lovely, hand-drawn. Would love to have that on a t-shirt. Oh. It's really amazing when you look at these plans and you start to zoom in and you just see kind of the attention to detail, and you think about how Sewell had to really consider all these features. And when you look at his 50 pubs, they all look different, but you can still see the similarities. So how did he come up with all these ideas? It's quite amazing. This is the interior. You can see the saloon, you can see the public, the cellar, you can see the partitions as well that he put here. The tap room was actually one level below the public bar. It was just a hatch with a tap. I don't think you actually saw someone's face. You would just see a hand giving you a drink. This is the partition. It may not have looked like this, but you can see it in the plan. And when I went to the Red Line a few years ago and I started geeking out, thinking where the partition used to be, and when I ordered my drink and I lifted some of the items there, you can see there's actually an infill where the partition used to be. And I told the staff, and you know what they said? We're going to call the police. All right? But you can sometimes see these traces of where things used to be. So next time you go to a pub, try to work out, okay, so the door went here. You're going to look really weird. It's a bit freakish to some people, but it's good fun. This is the plan of the new pub. So you can see that still in the 1920s, it still had all these partitions. So the public bar, the private bar, the saloon, the tap room, the bar parlor, that was really the best. Parlor was almost like the saloon lounge as well. You had the urinals. The entrance was actually from the street. Controversial. The bottles and jug, also called the off sales, off license, and so on, this was an off license. So you could just go in with a jug, fill the jug, take it home, or buy bottles. So a lot of pubs just had this little kind of thin corridor. The Stag's Head in Hoxton still has its original partitions for the off license. So you can just see that literally you just go in, and just like you go to an off license now, if you didn't want to stay, you just buy the bottles, fill the jug, and go home. In the Red Line, you can still actually see they've got the licensing notice for consumed on or off the premises. So you had on license, which if you go and sit down, but you also had the off license. This is just a comparison of the two plans. So this is the old Red Line, and this is the new Red Line. So definitely less compartments, but still adhering to the main concept and the division. Now you see this and you think, can we put them on top of each other? Definitely. And again, you can just see how they had to, the footprint was much smaller compared to the old one. Now, I found out a few weeks ago, actually, when I did the talk at the Red Line, that like a lot of Sewell's pubs, like the Rose and Crown, like the Army Navy, the Red Line also used to have this lovely vitrolite ceiling. And the idea was to create a very airy, open, less rowdy and intimidating atmosphere. And unfortunately, I think in the late 80s, someone ripped the partitions and ripped the ceiling as well. But yeah, so the Royal Oak has it, the Army Navy has it, the Rose and Crown has it, so Red Line used to have it. This is just the first floor. So you can see there was the flat, dining and club room. This was the second floor plan, so more bedrooms. And I just want to show you a few photos and then I'll wrap up. So this is the new Red Line in 1955. Lovely Truman's signage. Because the idea was if you enjoy the Truman's brand and Truman's beer, you look for the Truman's pub, or you look for the Courage pub, or the Wheatbread, or the Watney. This is 1975. Still called the Red Line, still has the big sign. These were the publicans, the Brennans. A lot of pubs for a very long time, up until I think the late 80s, usually just couples running the pub. Their daughter actually came when I gave the talk at the Red Lion, and she shared some really amazing memories and stories about growing up in the pub from the late 60s all the way to the early 80s. This is 1982, still called the Red Lion, still has the Truman sign. This is circa 1985. Bring back the Red Lion on the door. (1993), now it's the Magpie and Stump. A lot of people kind of tell me that that's the name that they remember it by. By this point, like I said, no partitions, it's an open plan. If someone from the Victorian or Edwardian period came into the Red Lion today, they would think it's a warehouse. Because it's a very different experience when you drink in a very small compartment with those lovely partitions, only 2-3 tables. It is like having a drink with a friend in your house, as opposed to coming in and there's like 15 to 20 chairs and tables everywhere. It then became the Top in 98. And that sign was revealed for a few days during refurbishment in 2015. Then it was the Stoke Top. That's how I first kind of knew it when I moved to the area. Then it became the Lion. And in 2017, it reverted back to the Red Lion. Hooray! So that was it. That was a brief overview of the history of the Red Lion from the old to the new. Hopefully you have a newfound appreciation of why it looks the way it does, how come it has all these doors, and next time you go you think, oh, so the off license is shut, I can go either from the saloon or the public, and so on and so on. So thank you very much.